Let's move now to authentication, and we'll go step by step through that one because it's a little bit more delicate. And delicate because there are a few different modes. One of them is the easy one, that's central authentication. That's where the authentication goes through your controller. So that's one, it's not very difficult. You have the controller doing everything just like we've been doing so far. But it's delicate because we have two other modes, and they are called the same. There is the local mode, but local as if radius call from the access point mode. In that mode, the access point is going to be able to call directly a radius server for your client authentication without relying on the controller. What is a little bit delicate here is that this mode can be used as a primary mode for your authentication or can be used as a backup mode when the AP switches from connected mode to standalone mode. We'll come back on that. But there is also local authentication, but local as in the access point doing the authentication. In that mode, the AP is going to do the authentication as a local radius, pretty much like the local heap we have on the controller or the local radius we're configuring on the autonomous access point. It's the same concept, so the AP itself is the radius. What is a bit delicate here as well is that this local mode on the access point can be a primary mode or can be a backup of the local radius mode. So you see we have a few combinations to play with. We'll go step by step because some of these combinations only make sense when you create Flex Connect groups that we'll do in an upcoming lesson. So let's go have a look at how you configure this authentication and start with the first one. So we're back on our controller and I'm going back to my configuration. And remember, one access point is in Flex Connect mode, the other one is in local mode. So for now, I have local switching configured, but I haven't taken care of authentication, which means that everything is going to happen in the controller for now. It's central authentication because I haven't said otherwise. So if I go back to my SSID and I go back to the usual Advanced tab where the Flex Connect options are set, you see I have Flex Connect local switching set. But I haven't set local auth, so that means that authentication would be on the controller. If I click local auth, then it's going to be local on the access point. Notice that I cannot choose local auth if I uncheck local switching. In other words, if I do central switching, well, it's central switching, so authentication is going to be central as well. There is no way for me to select local authentication for central switching because it's not logical. I keep insisting on that because so many people get it wrong in the exam or in the real world. So be careful. You need to have local switching if you want to talk about local authentication. As long as you have central switching, it's central authentication only. So let me go back and check again my local switching option. And if I do so, default is still to use central authentication, but I can decide to use local authentication instead by checking the Flex Connect local auth box. If I do this, what happens? Well, basically the access point is going to stop asking the controller. So if it's a pre-shared key, the access point will get the pre-shared key from the controller, and then of course we'll use that pre-shared key to authenticate clients. If you're using another mechanism, a central type of heap with .1x, then what happens? Let me go and check apply. Here in my case it's .1x, so what happens is that the AP is going to simply relay the .1x query to the local network. Is that very efficient? No, not really, right? Usually you define an authenticator and there is a sort of one-to-one communication between that authenticator and the radius server. So just enabling this mode on the access point without going any further is not going to be very efficient for you. You need to define that authenticator. And that is not something you can do really at the access point level. And this is where the concept of group comes into play, because defining how the communication happens between the AP as a relay and the authentication server is going to be defined at the Flex Connect group. So we'll need to go a bit deeper and configure Flex Connect groups. So we have local authentication set, which is perfectly making sense as long as you use pre-shared key. If you get into the .1x, you need to go here and configure Flex Connect groups. And that's the next lesson.